Hello once again, book lovers, and in this instalment it's the turn of The Plantagenets by Dan Brown, who writes the story of this dynasty in his usual entertaining and readable way. It's 600 pages of nice meat to get your teeth into. I say that as a vegan. In the last review, I mentioned this would be putting a magnifying glass over a part of it. Indeed, Mr. Brown put that magnifying glass over the Peasants' Revolt himself and wrote Summer of Blood, the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, which I've also read and also recommend. And if you want another little magnifying glass that I've already used, how about Claudia Gould's King of the North Wind, which is a biography of Henry II. So anyway, this book starts before the Plantagenets to set the scene. So it goes sort of William the Conqueror, 1066, his dynasty, which eventually leads to the first Plantagenet king, Henry II, and his famous wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Quite a lot of powerful women crop up again and again in this story. It's another Game of Thrones without the dragons. There's family trees, there's treachery. They're very nicely done sketches of the personalities of each king, whether they be saintly or warrior-like or a bit mad or cruel. All beginning with the shipwreck, the white ship going down off the coast of France, which, if you don't know the story, here's a nice place to read it. But it's one of those massive what-if moments in English history, as are the comings and goings in France, because we're embracing the 100 Years' War here. In case we've forgotten our history, we're talking about Henry II, Richard I, Henry III, Edward I, II and III, and finally Richard II. Towards the end of that is when the eternal enmity with the French bubbles over, due to, as usual, some politicking. And it still surprises me today that they can sign over duchies of Lancaster or Kent or Cornwall, transferring power with the stroke of a pen or the dub of a sword. Aquitaine and a lot of the lands down from Normandy, Brittany, Poitou, Gascony, all the way down there, as we forget that this grew and shrunk until it was reduced to the 5 ports. And we're still in a time when the kings actually put on the armour and went and did the fighting. So lots of tales of daring do. So as we're spanning more or less from 1100 to 1400, there's plenty of time for lots of parallel history. Because although this is the history of the Plantagenets, there are contingent events, of course. What happened during those times? Well, there was the Peasants' Revolt, there was Magna Carta, the constant wars with France, including the Battle of Crécy, the deposition of a couple of these kings. We tend to imagine that one dies and another is handed the throne, but not so. It seems that Edward III was left to starve to death in a dungeon, though nobody knows for sure. And also, perhaps the most important thing of all, towards the end of the Plantagenets' reigns, the imposition of English at the court, because they were previously Normans, now are Angevins, and people more connected with foreign lands. Finally, our mother tongue is elevated from peasant speak to something acceptable, which begins to spawn recognisable works of great literature, such as Canterbury Tales and Piers Plowman, etc. So it's a long and complex tale in the end of broken oaths and kept oaths, marriages of conveniences and marriages of love, as we get a tinge of the old Arthurian legends seeping through due to the way that these kings wanted to imagine their kingships. Edward the Confessor was a great favourite as a role model previously. In fact, he seems to have been the patron saint until St. George was used by Henry III, if I remember right. It's worth remembering that Richard the Lionheart, prior to him, the great hero, thanks to his amazing deeds in the Holy Land, hardly spent any time at all in England, except in the sense, of course, of the England that includes the large part of France where he preferred to be. Wide-ranging then, but very readable. Another recommended slice of history, which gives you the urge to put the magnifying glass on parts of this book and examine a little bit more what was happening after the plagues. Oh, I forgot the plagues play quite a good part of this. And if I was to single one other thing out, the incredible oppression of Jews that went on all through Europe in these 13th, 14th centuries. The incredibly cruel and unjust punishments for not doing anything wrong that were meted out to them, and cruel tricks that were played on them, make for interesting history, if not happy history. And this is neither happy nor sad, it's just what happened when it happened. I mean, sometimes it does, I admit, although I love history, I'm just not very good with dates. Well, make what you will of that, but I'm not. And the other thing that kind of befuddles my little head is titles. So there are many passages where earlships and lordships and dukedoms are being doled out, which sound to me rather like the old Shakespearean sketch from That Was the Week That Was. But you can skip over them, can't you? And pick out the bits you like, whether it's the gory killings or the fate of the rural poor. Here it is, almost 300 years of history in 600 very readable pages.